Here he is back on Coast to Coast, L.A. Marzulli. Hey, L.A., good morning.
Good morning, George. Great to be on. How are you, sir?
Good. I'm looking forward to this. So what's new with you?
Well, I started a new film series called The Watchmen Chronicles. I came up with the idea because people would come up to me at the table, and they'd start sharing their stories, and I said to myself, my gosh, this is unbelievable. I got to get this on film. And so I grabbed my camera and just started filming people. And the stuff that came across, not only in person, but on my desk and emails and telephone calls, and just absolutely through the roof. Some of this stuff just blew me away, and it's ongoing. So what I love about it, George, they have a safe landing place with me. And what I mean by that, so many people are afraid to say anything because of the ridicule. And the whole point of the film is basically to say that, look, guys, UFOs are real, burgeoning, not going away. We need to start talking about it. We need to rip the covers off the dirty little secret. And one of the most startling aspects of the film, I'm at these conferences, and most of them are Christian conferences. And I go, how many of you have seen a UFO, lights in the sky, an encounter with a being? Give me a show of hands.
And there they go. Right?
Up they go. It's like up as high as 35% at some conferences. And
that's high.
That's really high.
And you call it the Watchmen Chronicles.
Watchmen Chronicles.
And it's a good job. And what makes this one so unique from some of the other films out there?
Well, again, it's in their own words. And so everybody that comes on the record has actually had a close encounter. Something has happened to them. I think there's only 2 people in the entire film where it's secondhand information. The only reason why I went with that is the stories were incredible. One of the stories, for instance, is this woman called Jenny Ostergaard. And look at her body language. Body language is off the charts. She's obviously experienced something that's troubled her. And what she's doing, she's talking about her mother. Now, she has no idea of my research. She has no idea of what 20, 30 years of doing this has uncovered in some of the stories that we've heard. And she tells us this on the record. And her face kind of contorts when she says it. She says, my mother was always troubled. She lived her whole life in fear. She was troubled by something. She would never really tell us what it was. But at certain times, she would sort of reveal a little bit of it. And she would say, these entities came in my room, and they got me, and we went through the window. And when she told me that, my jaw dropped, because that's Robert Salas. We've covered this in Watchers. How many times have I heard it? What they don't understand is it's hands down. Everybody goes through the window. Now, some people go up through the ceiling, too. But most of the time, it's through the window or through the door.
What are they bringing? The spirit, the soul, or are they, dematerializing people?
I have no idea, George. Everybody I've talked to that has been taken that way, for instance, Bill, who was taken, came right up through the ceiling. Al, who was taken in his car. He was taken at one point, and I call this UFO brain fog. He's taken, and he's driving home after work. He's in his car, and he goes by his exit, and he doesn't think about it. He just drives by his exit like, oh, this is normal, and he knows he's about to be switched off. He can feel it. It's happened so many times that he knows. 4 hours later, he awakens in the car. His entire body is vibrating. He's in the most intense white light you've ever seen, and the car is being lowered from the craft on a road miles away from where he left off 4 hours ago. And when the car hits the ground, it starts by itself and begins to drive down this curvy road by itself. Where have we heard that before? It's the kind of stuff, the high strangeness that we're looking at. He makes it back to his house. He crawls in the bed in the fetal position and basically cries himself to sleep. Now, that's the horrific part of Al's story. There's other parts of the story which are just incredibly unnerving. But there's a happy ending to Al's story, and maybe we can get into that a little bit later.
Do they all have happy endings?
Everybody in the film that comes on the record, whether it's Close Encounters of the First Kind or Fourth Kind, has been able to either stop the abduction, get out of it, basically rebuke first, ask questions later type thing. And I realize some people might be listening going, oh, it's impossible. Nobody can stop these guys. Al stopped his abductions, and I was instrumental in helping to do that. Then at the end, I don't want to, spoiler alert, but Al goes through the whole movie, but we go, oh my gosh, this guy's been through the ringer. And at the very end, look at his body language, look at his face. It's just a different guy. So he has a happy ending, yes.
Why do they all want to stop their abductions? Are they afraid? What's the problem?
The fear is usually through the roof. Everybody that I've talked to. Now, there's a thing called Stockholm Syndrome, and with all due respect to Whitley Strieber, he's been abducted so many times, the thing has happened so many times that he sort of identifies with his captors. That's called the Stockholm Syndrome. And I'd love to sit down with Whitley sometime and have a heart-to-heart over the thing. So, look, there seems to be a supernatural component to this thing. Everyone that I've spoken to that has even an encounter of the first kind, there's this visceral feeling. In fact, I went down and interviewed this woman who lives locally, and she had an encounter of the first kind. She's in her car, she's got her cell phone, and she sees 3 discs, and they're coming at her, classic discs. And all of a sudden, they morph, they change. She watches the craft change into orbs of light. One of them goes over the car. At this point, she's completely panicked. There's like this visceral fear which comes over her. She's absolutely panicked as she's trying to photograph this thing, and she gets some cell phone footage of it. And she was overcome with fear. This is just one person out of many. Now, there are people that get the lights in the sky, that look at the stuff, and they're just, what is that? And they don't get hit with that, but it's an encounter that's far away. It seems the closer you get to an encounter with the craft, with an entity, that's when the visceral, the primal fear comes in. There's one guy called Randy Clark, who's a musician. He comes on the record, and it's no photograph, no video, but you're just watching this guy. He's telling a story, and he's packing up his music equipment like 30 years ago, all right? And he looks up, and he hears this like buzzing noise, and that kind of distracts him. He's not sure what it is, like electrical generator. And he looks up in the sky, and there's like this cigar-shaped cylinder, and it's broad daylight, and it's maybe like 100 yards above him, and he freaks, and he says it. And again, body language, watch people's faces. I'm a student of this, having interviewed hundreds of people by now, and he gets a little choked up. You can see it, and he's trying to stay calm. But he runs away from the scene as he's telling it. He says this, that fight or flight happens real fast when he says it. And he runs to a neighbor's house because he's freaked out. And he pounds on the door, and his neighbor comes out, and he goes, look. And the neighbor looks at it, but the neighbor starts to run, and he holds him back because the thing, which is probably, he estimated it 40 yards long, something like that.
120 feet, okay.
Something like that. And it's at the end of the road, and it begins to kind of bobble. No noise, no sound. It begins to sort of bobble, and then it takes off. And he says on the record, in his own words, if you weren't watching it, in a blink of an eye, it was gone. And that's what I saw when I was 12 years old. Not a cigar shape, but a silver disc. And when that thing took off straight up into the sky, I mean, it was gone. And like if you weren't looking at it, you'd miss it. It just shot up into the sky and was gone. So those are just some of the accounts of the people that come on the record.
L.A., what do you think is happening? What's going on? Why the abductions? I mean, we've all had our own theories over the years, making hybrids, experimenting. Yeah. What do you think's happening?
I think, and I agree with Dr. Jacobs in this, I think it's a replacement program. They are creating hybrids, hybrid entities, hybrid beings.
To replace us.
Well, it's different. I don't think it's not replace. Chuck Missler would say Satan is building an army. He's outnumbered 2-1. There's a breeding program going on. It ties back into my research with the Nephilim.
But they need us because they could have been doing this on their own.
They need us to get the genetic material, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You get a guy like Graham Hancock in his book Supernatural. Read the book. Would love to talk to Graham about it sometime. And Graham's taking ayahuasca, and he's down in Peru with the shaman taking the ayahuasca, and he's popping up into what I call the lower astral, the second heaven. And he's looking around, and to his astonishment, he sees the Greys, what we all know, those little guys, 4 feet with the big heads, the black eyes, and he's astonished. What are they doing here? And at the end of the book, after numerous ayahuasca trips, he states this: whoever these entities are, they seem to be obsessed with mating with us and creating some sort of a hybrid race. Now, that's where, my research comes into play with 30, 40 years of doing this stuff. This ties back into the Nephilim. These are, in my opinion, interdimensional entities, not extraterrestrial ones. But I have a slide which is from the Hubble telescope, and it shows just how dinky we are in this universe, right? We're just this little speck. But the problem is we don't know where we are. Nobody knows where we are. Nobody really knows what this thing really is. how it works, where we are, how we got here, it's all speculation.
It's a hologram. It's a computer simulation. We're not real.
There you go. I mean, we're real, but we're in some kind of holodeck thing. It's very, very strange.
It is strange. When we look at all of the things that you've studied here with the Watchmen Chronicles, have you concluded something?
I have. It's based on all that research. I have. I mean, people can look at what I've come up with. I mean, I'm not afraid to say I honestly feel that these entities are interdimensional. I think that they're nefarious. They have a very malevolent agenda. That agenda ties back into the biblical prophetic narrative. I believe this is the coming great deception. It's built on the Darwinian paradigm, which acts as a springboard. Evolutionists like Richard Dawkins will state that he believes that we were seeded here by life. And the reason why the neo-Darwinists are doing this is because they look at the DNA molecular structure and they realize this thing just didn't spring into existence. It had to come from somewhere. So they look out to the stars. But Jacques Vallée, J. Alec Hynek would also state that they believe that these entities were interdimensional, not extraterrestrial. If that's the case, then what's really going on here? Why does it mirror so closely the biblical account of a Nephilim, the taking of ovum, the taking of sperm? It ties back into the biblical prophetic narrative. It'll be like the days of Noah when the Son of Man returns. I mean, all these ancient prophetic texts talk about this, and that's why I think it's supernatural, it's spiritual, it's interdimensional.
Is it physical?
Oh, it's absolutely physical. Absolutely physical.
So you think they could be coming from other planetary systems, too?
No, I don't.
You don't?
I think they pop in and out of, I think they're interdimensional. I mean, I don't even know what this so-called universe that we're in really is.
Nobody does, really.
Nobody does, exactly.
I mean, I can't even get a physicist, L.A., to tell me about the Big Bang and really explain it. I mean,
it's conjecture. Nobody knows how that works.
You know, how did it start? Yeah. What happened? Where did it come from? Who jump-started it? What was it before it jump-started?
Right. the mind reels because this stuff is just absolutely outrageously incredible. We don't know where we are. And we go through the illusion of living and life. But these entities manipulate space-time, matter, and energy in ways that defy our physics. You can't go through the window. We both know that. That's impossible, and yet it happens.
And then yet it happens, absolutely. L.A., of course, Roswell, July 1947. What else is new? What's new? Have you found something?
What was interesting is this woman wrote me a while back, and what she does for a living, she will go into people at the end of life, and she'll dismantle their estates for them, sell parts of their estate. If they've got goods or collections of something, whatever it is, she'll try to find a buyer for it and sell it, and then give the money to the person, to the estate, while the person is still alive. One such person was this man called Colonel Hill. She contacted me because she had some figurines, one of them had an elongated head, and that's how I came into it. She said, "Would you be interested in looking at it?" She sent me a picture, and I bought it from her. They came from Asia. I thought it was very interesting to add it to my collection. So one thing led to another in the midst of the conversation and emails going back and forth. And she said, "Well, I've got some information on Roswell." And I immediately, my ears picked up, and I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she told me the story, and my wife and I flew to San Antonio a while back, and we interviewed her and her husband. Again, body language. They're both sitting in front of the camera, and it's Jim and Carolyn. And Jim looks at the camera and goes, "The testimony you're about to hear is true." Just like that. It's just, guy's got a beard. He's a big guy.
Yeah.
And she kind of nods her head, and she's just a wonderful lady, really bright, very articulate. And, again, she's got this business of dismantling people's estates. And one client that she had was Colonel Hill. This guy was OSS, intelligence officer during World War II. So she got to know this man over a 2-year period. They got to be very close, so much so that when his wife died, Jim and Carolyn took the ashes, and he had a request that he wanted them spread out in a certain area, and they did that for him. So there was an intimate relationship between them. About a month before he passed away, she was in a conversation with him, and she just brought it up, and she said, "Well, what about Roswell? Was it a weather balloon?" And remember, this guy's 90 years old at this point, so he's an old man, and he's close to death. He passed away a month after the deathbed confession, as it were. And he looks at her and he hangs his head and he brings it up and he goes, "What about it?" And she goes, "Was it a weather balloon?" And he lets out a deep sigh and goes, "It wasn't a weather balloon." And this starts the conversation. And then he spills the beans. And I guess, George, what it's like, it's these people, many of these people, and this is the same thing with the whistleblowers, they carry these things around with them all their life. And it gets to the point where they got to tell somebody. They got to get it off.
They want to get it out there.
They want to get it out. And he looked at her, and he basically corroborates pretty much everything we've heard. This guy was OSS. He was at Dallas Fort Worth when the crash happened in 1947. Apparently, he was flown into Roswell within 24, 48 hours, very quickly. She didn't know the exact time frame.
I want to play a little clip, L.A., of the radio broadcast from that event in July 1947.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
The American Broadcasting Company and affiliated stations present Headline Edition with Taylor Grant. From all over the world, wherever the day's headlines are made, Headline Edition brings you accurate, timely reports on the news behind those headlines, plus informative in-person interviews with the men and women who made the headlines today. Today's edition presents a roundup of the latest developments in the finding of a flying disc. Stay in step with history in the making. Stay tuned to Headline Edition. And now, here's Taylor Grant.
Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. Our correspondents in Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago.
The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucer. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazell was the man who discovered the saucer. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like. In Fort Worth, Texas, where the object was first sent, Brigadier General Roger Ramey says that it is being shipped by air to the AAF Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio. A few moments ago, I talked to officials at Wright Field, and they declared that they expect the so-called flying saucer to be delivered there, but that it hasn't arrived as yet. In the meantime, General Ramey describes the object as being of flimsy construction, almost like a box kite. He says that it was so battered that he was unable to determine whether it had a disc form, and he does not indicate its size. Ramey says that so far as can be determined, no one saw the object in the air, and he describes it as being made of some sort of tinfoil. Other Army officials say that further information indicates that the object had a diameter of about 20 to 25 feet, and that nothing in the apparent construction indicated any capacity for speed, and that there was no evidence of a power plant. The disc also appeared too flimsy to carry a man. Now, back to Taylor Grant in New York.
See how the cover-up started, L.A.?
It's amazing, absolutely amazing.
They go from a flying disc,
right,
a missile, and then a day later, another report, and all of a sudden, the military starts backing away from it.
Incredible.
Jeez. So back to your story, of course. So this new information that was discovered tells you what, basically?
Colonel Hill stated to this woman, Carolyn and Jim, that he was there, that he was flown into Roswell, that it was not a weather balloon, and get this, he had contact with one of the entities. Colonel Hill had 4 degrees, psychiatry, theology, philosophy, and I forget the 4th one. He had 4 degrees, highly educated man, and he's flown into Roswell within 24, 48 hours after they find this thing. He's there because he's an interrogator.
Yeah.
That's what he was in OSS, which later became the CIA. So he's a Army intelligence officer, interrogator, and he's flown in there to try to make contact with one of these entities. Colonel Hill stated to Carolyn Raskin that one of them was still alive. The other one was deceased. One was still alive. And he tried to make contact with it, but was unable to do so. And, of course, they were frantically attempting to keep the second one alive. Secondly, he stated on the record, at least to Carolyn, that the material was shipped to Wright-Patterson, which, we just heard that. So there you go. She asked him what was different about these creatures, these aliens. What do they look like? He describes the classic gray. He says they were short of stature, large heads, long limbs, black eyes. And she said, well, was there any distinguishing feature? And he thinks for a minute, and he goes, yes, they had 6 fingers, not 5.
Wow.
And at the very end of the interview, Carolyn remembers another detail, and I just love her facial expression. Once again, body language tells everything. And she looks at the camera and she goes, oh, yes, they were wearing some sort of a suit. They had a suit on. So what are we to make of this? And I spent an afternoon, a lovely dinner with them. I interviewed them. This guy's a pastor, okay? Jim's actually a pastor. So he looks at the camera and he goes, Colonel Hill was not the type of a guy to pull a prank. And these people knew this man intimately. We tried tracking him down with one of my private eyes that I use to track people down. It was there, but it's sort of a common name, Jesse Hill. We were able to track it down to a point. She has some paperwork that was signed by him. But both Carolyn and Jim look right at the camera. I believe their story is 100% true. And what it does, again, it's not a smoking gun. We'll never know unless we can get to Wright-Patterson. Who knows? That's never going to happen.
Well, and all these great witnesses are dying away.
Yeah, they are. The guy was 90 years old. This is back in 2002 he passed. So there you go.
Will we ever get, let's say you interviewed the late Jesse Marcel Jr.,
yes,
who was the son of Jesse Marcel, who saw the craft, saw the pieces, even told his son there was strange writings or encryptions on a piece of a metal bar that when he squeezed it, it would unfold and then come back to its original shape. Now that to me sounds a little like tinfoil, aluminum foil, something that would be like in a gum wrapper. Mm-hmm. If you squeeze it, it kind of comes back, but I may be wrong about that.
What was interesting is my interview with Jesse Marcel, and that's in the book, Further Evidence, but I met him face-to-face. He came in on the record.
Nice guy.
Wonderful man. And he stated emphatically, and his book states it emphatically also, that there's no way in a month of Sundays that his father, Jesse Marcel Sr., could ever have mistaken a weather balloon for a so-called UFO or flying saucer. There's no way. I mean, it's an insult to the man's integrity, to his intelligence, to his career. It really is. He was a fall guy.
Yeah.
He was
That's
a patsy.
Right. He was the patsy.
He was the patsy.
I think the last person associated with Roswell that died in 2015, a couple years ago, and that was the mortician, Glenn Dennis. Mm-hmm. Did you ever have a chance to chat with him?
I never did. I'm familiar with his testimony, what he had discovered. What was interesting in my research, and again, this is something that it's very, very difficult to track down. I was contacted by a woman who claimed she was the nurse, and what do you do with stuff like that?
Oh, I know it. I mean, and Dennis claimed that he was a witness to an alleged alien autopsies,
yep.
And he was told to get little tiny caskets, mm-hmm. And for years he stuck to that story. I mean, why in the heck would this guy lie from 1947 to his death? What's the point?
Jesse Marcel Sr. and Jr. were. Why would they sit there and make something up? The woman who contacted me via email, then of course she went dark. She stated in the email that she was the nurse that the mortician knew. She was the one that drew the picture on the napkin and the whole deal. Whether that's true or not, I mean, there's no way to vet it, and she went dark, and so I was unable to follow up on it. But I remember talking to Jesse Marcel Jr. and how emphatically he stated that what he handled that night was definitely not a weather balloon, and that this whole thing was concocted by the military to cover it up.
Yeah, somebody from Washington called them and said, "What are you saying? Change the story." Mm-hmm. And they did.
Yeah. And they did. So Colonel Hill's deathbed confession, in my opinion, it's certainly not conclusive because there's no smoking gun. But what it does do, it's another person in a long line of people who have come on the record, many of them with deathbed confessions, stating emphatically that it was not a weather balloon, that it was real, entities were there, that one was alive, one was dead. Now that's all that he saw. Who knows? Remember, the Army does everything in intelligence. Everything's compartmentalized. Who knows if there were 2 bodies, 8 bodies? We don't know.
We don't know that.
Different people have different stories, so it's hard to put all the pieces together. But I found the testimony riveting, and Carol and Jim's interview on the film, The Watchmen Chronicles, in their own words, is just very, very compelling.
And what happened to the live entity? Did he get picked up by his own kind and taken back to his system, or did he die here? What do you think happened to him?
I followed up. Carolyn did not know. Carolyn had no idea.
Let's talk a little bit, if we can, L.A., about the whistleblowers
Sure.
that you have in the Watchmen Chronicles as well. A couple of them, don't you?
There's 2 whistleblowers. They're separated by about 30 years. Their experiences happen 30 years apart. One guy comes up to me at a conference. Again, this is one of the reasons why I created the film. It's like, we got to do something with this information. It's just incredible. And he would not come on camera. Neither of these guys come on camera. They will not do it. They won't state their names. They have security clearances, the whole deal. And in the film, I'm in front of like a white screen, and there's a caveat to the viewer. And I say, look, there's no way to vet any of this, having been fooled by the fairy, and we all know what that's like. So I'm a little gun shy these days.
Yeah.
But I look at the camera and I say, look, there's no way for me to vet this. But their stories are very compelling, and I leave it up to the viewer to discern whether their stories are true. But I went with it because we've got 2 of these guys saying the same thing from different locations in the United States. One guy is in the South. The other guy is out in the Southwest. They're separated by thousands of miles, and their stories are 30 years apart. Both of these guys, to cut to the chase, George, both of these men had experiences with deep underground military bases. And they were I'll start with Whistleblower 2 and backtrack. Whistleblower 2, this goes back 35, 40 years ago, a long time ago. He was in a branch of the armed services, top of his class, and he was being courted. And he wasn't sure why he was being courted, but like brass would come in, generals, whatever, admirals, people with high military rank would come in and talk to this guy, and certain people would take him out on the weekends and get him liquored up for free and do the stuff that guys do. And one night they were all liquored up. They had been drinking heavily, and they drove and they drove and they drove for what seemed like hours. And in the distance, he saw what looked like some sort of a base. These lights just went on. The guy that was driving made some signal or pressed a button or whatever, and things lit up. And they got there, and it was a heavily secured base in the side of a mountain. And the mountain just opened up, and they went down into this thing. And there were many different checkpoints. There was an iris scan for the man who was driving, and they're driving down and sideways and all these different levels, and they get down to this one level, and these huge doors open up, and there he's escorted in. And we've heard this before, and he told me that
you believed him.
I believed him. He was very nervous, would not come on camera. He saw craft, he saw grays in the distance, and on a balcony overlooking the scene, what could only be described with Paul Hellyer, the former Canadian Minister of Defense, would describe as the tall whites. They were over 9 feet tall. They had green robes. Their eyes were black. Their skin was gray. They had elongated heads. They were over 9 feet tall, in his estimation. The Greys were on the floor, working side by side with U.S. military. He freaked. He wanted nothing to do with this, and they debriefed him in a very intense way.